Welcome to the Healing for Male Survivors podcast. This is a podcast for male survivors of sexual abuse and assault, whether as a child or as an adult. Know that you are not alone and the abuse was not your fault. My name is Mike Chapman. I'm a certified recovery life coach and also a survivor. Let's find hope and healing together. And welcome to the Healing for Male Survivors podcast. I'm Mike Chapman, your host, and we have another special episode this week. We have a panel discussion with the topic of triggers. What kind of things trigger you? Have you ever been really triggered to the point where nothing really helped? And what did you do? Those kinds of things, because all of us face triggers. Not only survivors, but everyone can be triggered by different things. But as survivors, oftentimes we can get severely triggered by things in our environment, things in our surroundings, or just memories that randomly pop up. So with me today, I've got three of my former guests. We've got Daniel Eichelberger, and Luke Wiersma, and Dan Carlson, all prior guests from my podcast, and also prior guests on our last panel discussion too. So I'm so glad they're here again to discuss things. And a brief introduction, one or two sentences. We'll start with Daniel.
I'm Daniel Eichelberger. I am a survivor of childhood sexual abuse from the time that I was fairly young until 14 years old, and I'm glad to be here today.
Glad to have you. And Luke.
Luke Wiersma. I'm a survivor as well. I was raped from the ages of 16 to 18. I'm a leader for SCSA's men's meeting now.
Excellent. And Dan Carlson.
Yeah, Dan Carlson, Tucson, Arizona, HVAC technician. Been father of 4, grandfather of 2, and childhood sexual abuse survivor.
And welcome. So, if you have listened to my Memorial Day special, I talked about a story a few months ago where I was triggered severely at a husband material leaders retreat and mentioned about what I did and how I handled it. I got severely triggered, and it even took me time to realize that I was being severely triggered. I felt weird, I felt ill at ease, and it took time to even realize, oh, crap, I'm being triggered right now. In fact, it was well into, I think on my way leaving the restaurant, I'm realizing, oh, crap, I'm really triggered, aren't I? And it took a whole bunch of time to get to the point where I even recognized I was in a trigger. And then it was all that evening and into the next morning trying to deal with that trigger. So let me pose a question to each of you. Do you remember a time in your own past, in your own stories, when you were severely triggered? And what led up to it? What did you do? What do you think caused it? And what did you do to get out of it? And how do you resolve it? And what happened? And whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, I remember it wasn't that long ago that it happened. You know, I'm still not sure what led up to it, honestly. I'm still trying to figure that out. But I remember the feelings well.
So where were you and what was leading up to it?
Oh, I was at home. I had a slight argument, I guess, with somebody the night before, and I think my anxiety was high from that. And usually, I mean, to be honest, usually I smoke marijuana to calm down. It made it worse.
Oh,
So that whole rest of the day, the whole day actually, it took for my fiance to talk me down to a point where I could start processing again. Because my mind was just, it was you put it, a trigger tornado.
Right. Yeah, that's something that Drew calls it in Husband Material as well, trigger tornadoes, when not just a trigger, it's like a super duper major trigger.
after I finally came down, I mean, the feeling alone, just that depressed, my anxiety was still high. My walls were still up for a couple of days. It still took time for me to even come down. That was just a lot of breathing techniques. I was doing that daily. The 3-3-3 rule as well, which is 3 objects. An object you see, an object or something you hear moving part of your body. And that helped bring me back down to reality as well as the 5-5-5. Breathe in 5 seconds, hold 5 seconds, breathe out 5 seconds, and that helped as well.
Good, yeah, that's similar to what I've been taught as box breathing, where yes, you do in for a count of 4, but you count while you do it. So you go in for a count of 4, hold count of 4, out count of 4, hold count of 4, and then you repeat. And yeah, it's really good for spiraling thoughts, and it's good at calming. And then the fact that you're counting and using that part of your brain, that helps to calm that part of the brain when you're actually counting along with the breathing. But any kind of breathing exercise, because that oxygen can release stress, and it gives your brain the oxygen that it needs to process things and calm down. And so yeah, that sounds like a good strategy. But you said you were anxious the day before and after the fight.
So I was anxious the day before. I went to sleep thinking I was okay. I thought I had calmed down enough, and I went to sleep fine. I woke up this morning. I was actually watching a TV program, and as soon as I started the spiraling thought with doubt was just, at first I was doubting everything. Everything I know is true. I was just doubting it all. So I knew I was already in the spiral.
Right.
I was like, oh crap, this isn't good. And tried to calm myself down. When that wasn't working, when I called my fiance and talked to her.
I'm sure that helps.
Oh,
So
yeah,
reaching out to others, that's a good strategy. So don't lone wolf it, reach out to others, especially someone who knows the type of things that you go through. And that helped in my case as well, talking to some of the other men there at that retreat and talking it out with some of them. It helped. Didn't resolve it right away, but it helps. And it was good to know that I was loved and cared for in the middle of it. So, Dan or Daniel, anything you'd like to share? Any examples?
There's just too much for me to talk about and too little clarity on it. But the last time I think last night and today is actually coming out of a trigger that lasted at least 2 months. Was literally crawling out of my skin and with anxiety and shame and just dissociative. I have a lot of good tools. I was using them.
So what kind of tools were you using?
Obviously I've been leaning into Jesus big time, trying to stay in the Word, trying to stay in prayer, speaking about the things of the Lord with other people.
Did you talk to the other people about the fact that you were being triggered, or that you were going through something?
You're on husband material. I'm pretty prolific in trying to be honest about where I'm at when I post something or when I talk with somebody about their post. I think that I do a pretty good job of processing externally at this point, and things like your group here and husband material have been just godsends in that regard. That's why I'm always showing up for you, Mike.
Appreciate that.
It's a glutton for punishment.
Yeah. Yeah. Daniel, anything you'd like to add?
Sure. I think when I think of triggers, there are probably 2 ways that I can be triggered related to the childhood sexual abuse I experienced. And one of those is triggers to feel anxiety and then triggers to feel arousal. So there's 2 different types of triggers that I actually experience related to that. So I just want to, just for the sake of your question, the immediate thing that comes to mind is more of a trigger towards anxiety. And this happened, it was probably a little over a year ago. I was going through an old box of letters when I was a teenager. I used to write lots of letters to friends back in the days before email. So, but I had a letter. I came across a letter in my box that was from one of the friends of the family, an older man who had abused me, that he had written to me. I remember taking the letter out of the box and it kind of catching my breath when I saw his name. And I opened it and I kind of read through it. It was just a very general type of letter. And then I noticed this sinking feeling just creeping over me, a very, very physical feeling creeping over me that just felt like, I don't know, somebody had just put 100-pound weighted vest on my body. I remember just feeling like I need to get out of the house. I need to go. I went to Walmart of all places just to get my mind off of what I was thinking about. And I could barely even function going down the aisles there.
Going where?
Oh, I went to Walmart just to shop, to get my mind off of what I was feeling. Of course, the feeling went with me. It wasn't quite that easy. However, what I found most helpful at that time and in other times, because when I go into a trigger like that, it can actually last. It's a very emotional trigger, and it can last a few days and actually give me physical symptoms for a few days afterwards. And so one is that I remind myself, you have been here before, and this load will lift. Be patient. I do grounding exercises like Luke and you have talked about, which is breathing. And I am a very extroverted person in a lot of ways. So I find a lot of help through reaching out and connecting with safe people when I'm feeling very emotional like that. So I remember telling my wife, this is affecting me. And then I reached out to some of my friends to kind of, talk through what I was feeling. And eventually it does lift, the result of the trigger passes. That violent, I would call it an emotionally violent trigger, okay? I didn't feel violent, but it was emotionally violent to me. Was triggered by that letter that I didn't realize I still had, kept in a box of other letters from my youth.
So that sounds like another one of those trigger tornadoes that Luke mentioned and Drew has mentioned. What specific things have you noticed are triggering to you? The example I gave on the Memorial Day episode was we were at a restaurant and we had like 15 guys there, and they sat us on a big rectangular set of tables, half booth, half chairs, and we were against a wall. So all of the conversations were that sound was just bouncing off the wall and coming back on us. And that, I call it, the cacophony of male voices, just all intermixed with blah, 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 blah. It overwhelmed my system. And that's what started the trigger. For me, that makes sense because it was similar to the trafficking abuses where there was lots of men and lots of voices. So it brought me right back there. I know I've been at Christian events where they had the music extremely loud, and I got triggered there as well, just from the loud noise. I know HM retreat back in California, I think it was the second retreat. Someone came in the cabin when I was sleeping relatively early compared to everyone else and turned on the lights because they needed to find something. I just got so mad. And then it took realizing, oh, I was mad. I mean, so what? He turned on the lights. He needed to find something. But the fact that I got interrupted with a sleep with strong lights brought me back to the triggering, because I know if they were recording it with old 16 millimeter film, they would have these huge spotlights because you need lots of lighting for the film to work in those things, unless you were outside, or if it was nighttime, you would need the lights. So they'd be very, very bright lights. And I think, yeah, that triggered me as well. And it makes sense. So what specific things have you found that have triggered you in the past? And have you determined how that relates to your own story?
Specifically fireworks, but it's really any loud banging sound, actually. In my story, for those who haven't heard, I remember a banging sound like someone banging hard on metal while it was being raped. So I that is just one little thing, fireworks or any loud noise
That
triggers.
makes sense. Right. Right.
Even
I'm
like
sure.
you were talking, Mike, just being in a restaurant can trigger me because it's so much noise, it becomes overwhelming.
Right. Yeah. And I've been I don't know what it was, because I've been in loud, noisy restaurants before and it hasn't really bothered me. But that particular time, just the level, and because I think it echoed off the wall, then if we were in the middle of the restaurant, I might have not been triggered as bad. I also finally figured out that, yeah, just driving in the car for long distances, more than like 20 minutes or so, I start getting triggered. And the longer the car ride, the more triggered I get. And never really realized that before. But yeah, I start getting antsy. It's like I really don't want to be there, but I've got to get from A to B. And usually I'm in a situation where I'm the one always driving. So anytime I have a chance to let somebody else drive, yes, please drive. I love it when other people drive. But yeah, that gets triggering as well. Dan or Daniel?
For me, that would be smell. Certain smells will be very triggering to me. I'll give you some examples. The smell of a damp forest, the smell of an antifreeze leak in a vehicle, in the cabin of a vehicle, the smell of an antifreeze leak coming through the vents.
Right.
The smell of vanilla when somebody's making French toast. All these things are connected to those who abuse me. So they can be very, very triggering and evocative.
Smells are a very strong trigger, and that I don't know what it is, but they tie in to that core part of the brain and accesses a lot of memories. That's why when I interview, I do all these positive things, which are also really triggers. It's like all these positive memories, like your food memory. What's a food memory? That's related to taste and smell, but usually positive. So you can have positive triggers as well. And so like certain smells bring me right back to a really wonderful event as well. Smells, they activate memory really quickly. It's like, like the smell of a new box of Crayolas, or opening up a new container of Play-Doh. I mean,
Yes.
the smells bring you back such strong memories, or the smell of Elmer's glue, all those childhood memories that just bring you right back. It's like, oh, okay. But yeah, smells, both good and bad, can be triggering. And taste as well. I know I have an upcoming episode, might be posted. I don't know when this comes out, if it's going to be before or after, but on weird symptoms related to the CSA, and smells and tastes and so forth are a common theme in that as well. And yes, certain foods, often it's the texture of foods that are triggering. I didn't like it, but then I realized, oh, okay, yeah, it's related. Dan?
Had a lot of those sensory type triggers back in the day. And I got to tell you that I went through those 2.5 years where I was severely acting out and pretty much diving into the depths of my own depravity. And by the time I got done doing that, nothing sexual phases me anymore. I don't get triggered and remember being abused or something like that. Most of what I deal with is the way somebody's talking to me or my own mind trying to extrapolate somebody's thinking about me. And then I can get into an internal loop of self-condemnation and disassociation. And if I, back where I was 5 years ago, it was driving me further into my interest in fetish and sex and the relational dynamics, and I would have just dove into that stuff.
Right.
Not completely consciously, but consciously. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So moving on, if you feel yourself getting triggered, or what advice could you give to someone who, once they feel triggered, what strategies, what coping skills would you recommend for that person? We've mentioned a few things already, like the different breathing techniques that Luke and I mentioned. That can be helpful. What are some other strategies for people when they get triggered?
Yeah, but the one thing that I try to do as much as possible is I try to look at triggers that would normally send me into something to make myself feel better. I try to just lay all of that down and look at Jesus and worship him. It's not a matter of not doing the stuff that my triggers were leading me to. It's a matter of, I get a chance to go be with Jesus. So it works. Even in this last 2 months when I've never really felt very good at all, it's kept me from the brink of despair, for sure.
Yeah, I would second that. During that big trigger at that weekend, spent time with God and just myself and my thoughts. What I call it is also just riding the wave. That when you get triggered, it's not always something you can stop. You just need to ride through it, process it, talk through it with people, whatever you need to do while you're experiencing it to get through the other side. But pray.
Yeah, that's the other thing. You can pick up the phone or text somebody, and you can, make contact with somebody who's been supportive in the past. You usually get something that's familiar and comforting from them, can bring you back to yourself.
Exactly. That's why husband material has the concept of triads. So you have, it's similar to an accountability partner or a prayer partner. It's groups of 3 or more that you meet weekly and have each other's contact information. So if any one of you is having a difficult time, you have these people who are committed to be available to reach out. And that's why it's more than one, because one might be busy. Hopefully the other one or the other two are not busy, and you can reach out to them if needed. And that's been very helpful, knowing that there's someone I can call and knowing I will be there for them if they ever need it as well. So yeah, having someone to reach out to and building those relationships before it's needed and having that there for sure. Yeah, very helpful. But yeah, sometimes you can't necessarily stop it. I know my therapist, similar to what Luke said earlier about like something named 4 things that are blue in the room, or things basically if you're dissociating to bring you back into reality. That doesn't always work. It's like, okay, I'm seeing blue, 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 blue. Fine, still going through it. Doesn't help because if you're getting triggered, you're triggered. Daniel, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I probably have a little bit of a different take on this. I agree with everything you both have said. And like I said, I think we talked earlier about those grounding exercises that are very important and crucial. And
that's why I have panels, because we have all kinds of different so that's what I want.
Well, yeah, I guess so. You kind of hit on this a little bit, Mike, but sometimes when you're trying to avoid something, it makes it worse, right? And so the thing about triggers are they are deeply personal, uncomfortable. They rob us of a sense of self-control at times. And it's just, they make you kind of feel powerless and kind of under the whim of the memory or of the abuser still. They're like a lasting legacy from the, they are an inheritance bequeathed to you, if you will, from the abuse, right? So one thing that's been helpful for me is rather than looking at triggers as your enemy, you start to kind of see them as something positive. And here's what I mean by that. It's not the trigger itself, it's our reaction to it. I think a lot of times that distresses us. Like I said, I can feel like I've lost control of my emotions, or I don't have the strength to rise above how I'm feeling, or etc. Right? But I think my take on it is that you learn to respect your triggers because they are pointing to a boundary that had been violated in your life. And when you understand what that boundary is, you start to understand that triggers are actually a reminder of the importance of needful boundaries in your life and keeping those needful boundaries in your life. Like I said, I think there's a negative aspect to them, and usually it's our reaction to them.
Right.
But I don't think they're just vestiges or outcroppings of our wounding. They're also, from them can come strength, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right.
So I do like I said, I do those grounding exercises. I feel, more to Dan's point here is I feel very close. I feel closer to God in a way in those moments when I'm triggered, because I fly to him for support and help, or I fly to his people, right? And there is an aspect of worship. All of that's true. But also, I try not to sweat the fact that I'm having them. They go with the territory. If I will allow them, they can speak to me about how important boundaries are and still are in my life.
And I think you kind of mentioned it as well. They do point to wounds that might need healing or speaking up. It's like, hey, this is something God might need to work on some more. If you're getting triggered in a certain area, maybe it's because this is something God wants you to work through. And
Amen.
I know also it is a catalyst to help us process emotion. Oftentimes emotion related to the abuse that we may not have processed. Because I know I went through all kinds of sadness, but I let the feelings flow in the midst of the trigger. And feelings just started coming up, and I allowed the feelings to come in and out and through, and experiencing those instead of shutting them down. I think that's a great point.
So
Luke,
important.
yes. Luke, would you like to add anything to this?
I mean, I agree with Daniel that we shouldn't look at the triggers as our enemies, but I also believe it's crucial to have a crisis plan as well in case it does get to worst case scenario where you need to go to the hospital in order to work through it. And you never know. I just look at it as you never know.
Yeah.
I know I've
never been that bad, though I do have my therapist that I can call. He's really good. Okay, if it's really, really bad, you text me and I will be there. And that's helpful. Sometimes it's like, okay, let's set something up in a couple of days, but sometimes he'll get on and talk to me. But having a plan, knowing before it happens what to do when it happens. It's more when than if. For survivors. And like I mentioned, having a support network, knowing who you can contact. Those are great points, Luke. Like I said, partners or triads like we have in husband material, anything like that. So okay, this happens. Who am I going to call? Who are safe people to call? If it's really bad, what kind of therapist or life coach or trusted leader or church leader, someone that you can talk to about this, who will be there and knows your history, knows what's going on, and can be a good support for you. Fur babies are also a good fallback. I know my dog George is wonderful if I need to release some tension or just give him some love or just sit next to him. And yeah, he's very good at drawing a lot of emotions out from me. So any final thoughts as we're winding down? Dan, we'll start with you.
So last night was an incident where I guess you could say I was triggered. I mean, I was from the time that I told my wife on Sunday that I was going to talk to her Monday after work. I was in a state of agitation, and I find myself projecting futures that don't exist yet a lot, negative ones, of course. But I managed. It took me almost 2 hours to leave my house and go over there and visit her. I almost talked myself out of it. I did everything I could to, but I finally made it over there, and I stayed with her for an hour and a half and went through a lot of the stuff I figured was going to happen, but I was a little better prepared for it, and I didn't run, which is what I usually do. But I'm just remembering now my body. During that whole conversation, I was practically writhing. I was leg movements, didn't know what to do with my hands, kept rubbing my knees, rubbing my shoulders, putting my face in my hands. All of this was basically helping me to not run, but I was in a really, really triggered state. And she's like, "What is wrong with you?" And I'm like, "Just having these conversations with you scares the shit out of me. And I know it's not rational, but it does." And I'm like, but Jesus is giving me the strength to where I could actually come over here and do this. And that's, even though the meeting didn't go particularly well, and she said a lot of things that triggered my shame and also made me see how bad she was hurting. I came out of it, went into it asking Jesus just to something. I'm like, I've been in this long, long, dark hallway for so long now, and it's just like, I just need some relief. And I think it's on the way. And the big thing of how it's on the way is that I'm gaining the courage to face my triggers. That's really gratifying to know.
Right. That's good. Thank you for sharing that. Luke, any final thoughts?
Yeah, Dan kind of touched on it. When he was talking, I was thinking, what am I gonna say? What am I gonna say? But he when he was talking too, I heard him say about rationale. And a lot of people don't understand that is when we're triggered, nothing about us is rational. Our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, nothing about what we do is gonna be rational because we're in that fight or flight mode. We're in that mode of survival. I think that's something too that I thought that needed to be put out there.
We need to be able to face our triggers. That God said that we're going to suffer and we're going to go through trials, but that He has overcome the world in us. So I think we have to keep. It's good to have boundaries, but it's also good to take them down when they're no longer necessary.
Right.
Even if they still feel kind of necessary, but they aren't. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Right. That's the irrationality of it. Like we keep our boundaries up when they shouldn't be. That's so irrational.
And learning how to be vulnerable and take down those boundaries.
That's one of the harder parts for me. It's learning to be vulnerable, learning to share my emotions. I'm a very I'm social. I have social anxiety disorder.
Right.
So I don't go out much
because you went through. Right.
Yeah.
Hey, but you know something, bro? That doesn't, even though it feels like it's just part of you, it doesn't define you.
No.
Like if you, I know you're a Christian, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
All right, bro. So when you're surrendered to Christ, you can do stuff that would make the part of you that has social anxiety disorder go, what the hell is going on here? He'll have you interact with people in just miraculous ways. And that's the stuff we can look forward to. That we know what our weaknesses are, and that's when Jesus comes and He does something crazy while we're being weak. Blesses everybody what we can do when we surrender. So I'm just saying, none of the stuff that we're dealing with is the definition of us. we are God's beloved sons, and in us he is well pleased.
Amen.
Great comments, Dan. I appreciate that. Daniel, any final thoughts?
Just that I think that, like I said, it's good to have a healthy respect for the things that trigger us. To me, they point not just to wounds, but also to needful boundaries in our lives. They help us, if we will allow them to process emotions, like you mentioned, Mike, a very necessary part of our journeys to wholeness in relation to childhood sexual abuse. I believe the Lord can take what the enemy has meant for evil in our lives and make something good come out of it. And sometimes it's hard to see that in the middle of a trigger. But as we process them and as we understand the truth that they're pointing to about our experiences in our lives, I think we will find good come out of that. And we'll be able to help others as they go through their triggers as well.
Right. Good point. And with that, thank you, gentlemen, for being with us this week on the Healing for Male Survivors podcast. And for those who want to join us on future podcasts live, find out more about that on my website, polarlifeconsulting.com/live. We'll see you next time. If you would like to learn more about my coaching with Polar Life Consulting, where I provide one-on-one coaching and group coaching, both with a focus on healing for male survivors, reach out to me at polarlifeconsulting.com. That is Polar spelled Polar. I would love to hear from you. I want to hear your story. If you would like your story featured on this podcast, contact me via my website. If you like this podcast, please rate and review, because that's how other people can find me, and I really want to spread this message of healing and hope to others. And remember, you are not alone. Healing is possible, and the abuse was not your fault. Let me repeat that. The abuse was not your fault. See you next time on the Healing for Male Survivors podcast.